Hi, everyone. First of all, I just want to say a huge thank you to every single one of you for making my Cincinnati debut so incredibly special, and I really hope I get to see you all again in the next round. Those were the words coming from Alex Eala after her opening appearance in Cincinnati. But before she even reached the microphone, the atmosphere around the stadium had already told the story. Anyone standing in the hallway outside the show court in Mason, Ohio, on the afternoon of August 15th, 2026, would have heard the crowd before actually seeing it. The noise arrived first. It was not a few random cheers or scattered applause. It was a concentrated group of voices, loud, organized, and almost rehearsed, sounding like thousands of people who had been waiting for this exact moment and had no intention of letting it pass quietly. Then came the flags, blue, red, and white, with that unmistakable golden sun, being raised through the walkway even before the player appeared on court. And then Alex Eala stepped out, the number 17 seed, making her first ever Cincinnati Open appearance, walked into the arena, and the roar reached her before her shoes had even touched the court surface. This story is bigger than a ranking. It is bigger than a draw sheet. It is about a sound that has begun following a 21-year-old Filipino player throughout the American hardcourt swing, and about a claim that started spreading this week that would have sounded almost unbelievable only 6 months ago. The claim was that inside a stadium where the world's number one was also competing that afternoon, one of the loudest sections in the building belonged to Filipino supporters backing a player seated 17th. Whether that crowd was literally louder in decibel terms is something television broadcasts cannot establish. There is no official measurement proving that comparison. But what can be examined is why fans have started making comparison in the first place. Eala entered Cincinnati ranked world number 20 by the WTA, a career-high position she reached on August 3rd according to the official rankings. She became the first Filipino player ever to break into the WTA Top 20. She also arrived only 1 week after capturing the Washington Open, officially the Mubadala DC Open, a WTA 500 championship. She won by defeating world number 3 Jessica Pegula in the final. At Cincinnati, she was seeded number 17 and received a first-round bye, meaning the tournament was treating her exactly as the ranking system said it should, not as a curiosity, not simply as an inspiring story from a smaller tennis nation, but as an established top-level player. Those facts are the foundation of everything that followed. The crowd, the attention, the flags, the comparisons, and the noise all grew from that foundation. But there is an important part of this story that has to be handled fairly. Aryna Sabalenka is the world number one and the top seed in Cincinnati, by any reasonable standard. She is one of the biggest and most recognizable stars on the entire WTA Tour, and her matches at WTA 1000 events naturally attract major crowds. Nothing in Eala's story takes away from that. Sabalenka herself has spoken about a 2026 season that has not yet reached the level she established the previous year, while also making it clear after Toronto that she was not interested in panicking over individual results. There is no reason for her to panic. So when Filipino tennis communities began posting that Eala's Cincinnati crowd appeared bigger, louder, or more coordinated than those supporting some of the top seeds, the real conversation was not about trying to diminish Sabalenka. It was about two assumptions suddenly colliding. The first assumption is that at a WTA 1000 tournament, the world number one naturally controls the biggest atmosphere in the building. The second is that a player seated 17th, making her debut and coming from a country that had never previously produced a top 20 WTA player, could not possibly arrive with an entire fan movement of her own. Both assumptions were visible in Mason this week. One continued to look normal. The other started to break down, at least according to the videos and reactions spreading online. And perhaps the most interesting question is not who was actually louder on a particular afternoon. It is why anyone felt the need to compare the crowds at all. People start measuring something when they believe they are seeing a shift. And to understand that shift, you have to understand what Eala carried with her into Cincinnati. None of this appeared overnight. Begin with the sound itself. Footage shared by GMA News, ABS-CBN, and numerous Filipino fan accounts over the past several days showed essentially the same picture. Eala walking out for a second-round match against Elena Gabriela Ruse on August 15th. Philippine flags visible around the stands. Chants coming through the broadcast microphones. Supporters reacting as if they were following a player from one city to the next rather than simply attending one isolated tennis match. That word became important. Following, not just attending. Following, because the same pattern had already appeared in Washington. It had appeared in Toronto, and now it had arrived in Mason. This was not simply a local home crowd. It was a traveling fan base. And traditionally, a traveling crowd of this size is not something you expect to see behind the number 17 seed at a WTA 1000 event. Eala's match against Ruse itself ended very quickly. Eala was leading 6-1, 3-0 when Ruse retired with a right thigh problem, according to the official WTA match record. But the scoreline was not what captured the attention. The entrance did. The walk onto the court did. The atmosphere surrounding her did. And that takes us back to the significance of the number next to her name. Eala was seated 17th in Cincinnati, which gave her a first-round bye. That meant the tournament and the ranking system behind it were recognizing her as a top 32 player who had earned her place beyond the opening round. She was not being given a special stage because of her nationality. She had earned the stage through her results. And the most important result came only 1 week earlier in Washington. Eala won the Mubadala DC Open, a WTA 500 title. To reach that championship, she had to overcome several difficult opponents, including Zheng Qinwen after recovering from a set and a breakdown, defending champion Leylah Fernandez after trailing 1-5 in the second set, Elena Svitolina in straight sets, and finally world number 3 Jessica Pegula in the championship match. That final ended 4-6, 6-4, 6-0. That scoreline alone explains why the conversation changed. A 21-year-old playing her first WTA 500 final had closed out a top 3 player by winning 6 straight games in the deciding set. That is not simply a temporary hot streak. That is a result that belongs permanently on a player's resume. And the rankings responded accordingly. On August 3rd, 2026, the PIF WTA rankings moved Eala up 8 places to a career-high world number 20, making her first Filipino player ever to enter the top 20 in WTA history. That ranking is what placed the first round bye beside her name in Cincinnati. It is what placed the number 17 seed beside the Philippine flag in the draw. And it also appears to have become a signal for Filipino communities throughout North America. After that ranking announcement, the crowds appear to become more visible, the flags more organized, and the hallways louder. It stopped being simply tennis fans who happened to be Filipino. It became Filipino tennis supporters who were specifically coming to see Alex Eala. Those are two very different things. Anyone who has watched a stadium organize itself around one player understands the difference immediately. And this is where the story moves beyond rankings and points. Around Eala, Filipino fan communities have started using a phrase of their own, Eala mania. The term is spread through Instagram, Facebook, fan reels, and shared posts. It is important to be careful with that phrase because it is a fan-created expression, not an official journalistic designation. But when a phrase begins spreading rapidly across multiple communities, at exactly the moment a player's career is accelerating, it tells you that something real is happening even if the phrase itself cannot precisely measure it. And there is one moment that gives this entire story its emotional center. During her pre-tournament press conference in Cincinnati, transcribed and published by Tennis 365, Eala was asked about returning to the Philippines earlier in the summer before beginning this North American swing. Her answer revealed something unusually honest for a player at her stage of development. She explained that she is sometimes out of touch with the impact she is back home, and that experiencing support personally and interacting with the people who follow her allows her to understand a glimpse of their stories and the way tennis has affected their lives. Think about that statement for a moment. Before she walked into that Cincinnati hallway surrounded by Philippine flags, she was already telling reporters that she was still trying to understand the scale of her own impact. Her influence had been developing at a distance, in places she could not always see or experience personally. Then, only days later, she walked through that tunnel in Mason, Ohio, and the impact was waiting for her. She did not create that crowd herself. She did not have to organize every flag or teach every person when to cheer. It had been growing while she was busy playing tennis, and eventually it became visible enough to meet her when she stepped onto the court. That is also where we have to be clear about what this story can and cannot prove. The ranking is verifiable. The seed is verifiable. The Washington title is verifiable. The ruse scoreline is verifiable. The footage of the walkout is visible. But the claim that her Cincinnati crowd was definitely louder than Sabalenka's is not something that has been officially measured. There's been no published decibel comparison. No neutral organization has declared a fact, and nobody has produced an official measurement showing that Eala's supporters were objectively louder on a specific afternoon. What did happen is that Filipino tennis fans began making the comparison themselves. They shared videos. They placed clips side by side. They discussed the atmosphere and tried to judge the difference with their own eyes and ears. That perception is real, even if a scientific comparison has not been established. And that perception is actually the more interesting part of the story. A 21-year-old, seeded number 17 and playing her first Cincinnati Open, is generating enough atmosphere that fans are openly comparing her crowd with the crowds around the tournament's biggest stars. The comparison itself is the news. It is not necessary to pretend that someone has officially won the decibel contest. The fact that people are asking the question is already a sign that something has changed. The tour is beginning to acknowledge that shift as well. Amanda Anisimova, ranked world number 10, and Eala's third-round opponent on August 17th, was asked about facing Eala for the first time. In comments distributed through WTA video content, Anisimova described Eala as incredible and acknowledged that she had never played her before. That wording is significant. Anisimova is a Wimbledon finalist and a top 10 player. When a top 10 opponent describes a rising player as incredible before their first meeting, it is more than a routine compliment. It tells you how the opponent is viewing the challenge. The attention also extended beyond the players currently sharing the draw. Former U.S. Open finalist Greg Ruzetsky, writing for Tennis 365 this week, argued that Eala should not be intimidated by the difficult Cincinnati draw she received. That kind of public support from a Grand Slam finalist is not something that normally becomes a talking point around every number 17 seed. It reflects the way people around the sport are beginning to view her. They are not necessarily looking at Washington, Toronto, and Cincinnati as three unrelated tournaments anymore. They are beginning to see a trajectory. And when a player becomes trajectory rather than simply a result, the conversation changes. Expectations change. Opponent prepared differently. Crowds behave differently. To understand why this matters beyond tennis, you have to step away from Mason for a moment and look at the country behind the player. The Philippines had never produced a WTA top 20 player before Alex Eala. There had never been a Filipino singles champion on the WTA Tour before her victory in Washington. So when she walks onto a WTA 1000 court as the number 17 seed, she is carrying more than the results listed beside her name. She is occupying a position in Philippine tennis history that simply did not exist before her. And that is what makes a true cultural symbol different from a hashtag or a fan account.